Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for joining once again. This is Norm, back with another stream of talk and art for a given value of art. Today's drawing is for an upcoming cartoon featuring a unnamed pair of FBI agents. It's in the very early stages, so we will get more into that later. For today, I would like to start off by giving an update on the previously mentioned, in a couple weeks back, I mentioned that I had birthed, well, not me specifically, I had hatched some sea monkey eggs. So today I would like to give you an update on the state of my sea monkeys. This one is kind of important because as you may or may not recall, in the initial broadcast, I went on for some length about what I consider to be deceptive practices on the Sea Monkey Corporation's part in regards to the advertising, how in the advertising the sea monkeys were depicted as an aquatic race of human-like individuals, very small, but still 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head, big smiles, living in a nuclear family unit, and yet in reality, once you had hatched the sea monkeys, the resulting creatures looked like nothing so much as a piece of vermicelli that had been left in the back of the refrigerator long enough to grow hair and come alive. Well, it has now been about 2.5 weeks since that last report, and I am here now with an update on the state of the sea monkeys, and I can report now that I was wrong. I can't believe it, but no, these sea monkeys inside their little 7-inch tall sea monkey tank do in fact look like little tiny nude pink humanoids. They've got little sea monkey shops, they have little picnics set out, they're playing volleyball, wearing big gold chains and sunglasses. I'm big enough to admit when I was wrong, and I was wrong. And I do formally and humbly beg the pardon of the Sea Monkey Corporation. Okay, no, they look about the same as they did earlier. They're just a little bit bigger. They do still look like animated vermicelli. They're just about 3/4 of an inch now, most of them. Daily routine consists of swimming to the bottom of the tank, then swimming to the top of the tank and repeating the process. They're not super ambitious. One thing that has changed since the last time that I made a report on the sea monkeys is that I have started feeding them. The initial 7-day period went up. It is a 7-day. I think I said it was a 5-day cycle, but it actually is a 7-day. So it's a weekly feeding schedule, presuming that the water isn't particularly cloudy and you don't want to overfeed them. But I have begun feeding them on a weekly basis a single tiny scoop of the sea monkey growth food. And for what it's worth, for what meager entertainment value they provide, they do actually swim up to meet the food when you drop it in. So they actually are, they do display something along the lines of fish-like behavior. They are attracted to the food. One aspect that I did not, well, I was going to say did not expect. I guess I did expect it. I didn't expect it to be a visible phenomena at the scale we're talking about. But, no polite way to say it, the sea monkeys poop. The day after the initial feeding, I looked into the sea monkey tank and was startled to discover that one of the sea monkeys was considerably longer than the others. Upon closer inspection, I discovered that this sea monkey was not unusually long, but was in fact dragging along a streamer of poop that was about 3 times his total body length. And he must have really been getting his fiber because it was not disconnecting. He was just trailing it along like a biplane doing air advertising at a beach. Except instead of the banner saying, "Eat at Joe's," it was, "I already ate, this is poop." Frankly, I find the whole thing disgusting, and that's just one more strike against the Sea Monkey Corporation. Go on, unleash your legal dogs. Truth is an absolute defense. Yuck. Okay, next up, I had a chance very recently to revisit a film I have not seen in a while. This one was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. Actually, I'm not sure if it's Part 2 or if it's just Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. I could theoretically look it up. I probably should look it up. I'm on a computer. Just a moment. Okay, yes, officially it is Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, although it is also known as Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. Although, what does that even mean, known as? I mean, Was it ever officially released as part 2, or is this just a lot of people misremembering the name? My mother thinks that every version of A Christmas Carol is actually called Scrooge, but I'm pretty sure that would eventually be excised from the Wikipedia article. In any case, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Now, relevant to my reactions on this rewatching are the circumstances under which I did rewatch it. I was fortunate enough to attend a screening in virtual reality of this film, courtesy of my friend and alleged Irish-Canadian Dream Warrior, not his birth name. So what little relevance this has to the situation, I belong to a VR movie watching group where you meet up on a weekly basis inside a VR app, Big Screen, that is centered around synchronized video viewing in a virtual theater environment. And this is kind of important because I'm at the point in my life where I am perpetually so busy that even in situations where I do have a movie playing, like if I'm just at home and there's a movie on TV, I'm generally not really watching it. It's more or less just coexisting with me while we're both in the same room together. It's one of the reasons that I really haven't watched a lot of modern movies, besides the fact that they kind of suck. I just don't really have time or initiative to sit down and absorb that without doing something else in the meanwhile. And so having this virtual theater environment where you actually have a large group of people, 15 people, there are limited rooms, but it's, more than you normally fit on your couch. Having this room that is dedicated to watching the same film all at the same time, getting to hear and feed off of everybody else's reactions, keeping the focus on the movie itself, it is a kind of a rare opportunity for me to absorb that film. And so even though I have watched Texas Chainsaw 2 multiple times since the first time I saw it, this is the first time in a long time that it's been on, and it's been more than window dressing. I actually have paid attention to the film. And I am glad that I did, because Texas Chainsaw 2 was something of a radical departure for the franchise, made all the more interesting because this was literally just the second entry in the series. Normally, part 2 of any given film is just going to be continuing the first one. It's just going to take what people liked on the first one, what was successful, and iterate on that. That's the safe bet. But Texas Chainsaw 2 was released 12 years after the original. The first Texas Chainsaw was 1974, and it was a genuine independent production. Okay, well, I'll qualify that by saying that it was financed by an outside group. In fact, it was partially financed by the mob, who later screwed the filmmakers out of a lot of the profits. But that's a whole different thing. I take too long to get into it. Look it up. It's an interesting tale there. But the operable part here is that the film itself was made by a very small group of independent performers, writers, Tobe Hooper, essentially just a bunch of actual hippies making a horror film in Texas. It was shot on 16mm, and while it was not shot or presented, with the exception of the opening crawl, was not shot or presented as a documentary. It was not shown as like found footage or anything like that. These were actors playing characters in scripted roles. There was this grimy tinge of realism over the whole thing that made you think that maybe, just possibly, they handed the camera off to legitimately demented individuals documenting the horrible deaths of a bunch of teens. It basically had the feel of a found footage movie without ever being presented as a found footage movie. Basically that generation's Blair Witch Project. And because I just realized that the Blair Witch Project was released in 1999, and thus is horribly outdated and does not work as a point of cultural reference, we'll say that it was that generation's, I don't know, Paranormal Activity. Is that franchise still going on? Maybe I should watch a new movie at some point. Anyway, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the first one, was extremely popular. It was a major success, largely because it was an independent production. It was shot for basically no budget out in the middle of nowhere with nobody. So the movie was very successful, but it did not immediately move to a sequel. In fact, possibly the nature of film at that time, because it was not unusual for movies that performed well, particularly for non-mainstream films, your drive-in or grindhouse fare, to just sort of stay in circulation, to get a stream of constant small re-releases in these off-Main Street theaters. So the original Texas Chainsaw kind of had a life of its own while its director, Tobe Hooper, was off building a larger name for himself inside more mainstream features. He made The Funhouse, he made Poltergeist with Steven Spielberg, and so by the time that Texas Chainsaw 2 came around as a viable project, he had grown and changed as a filmmaker. He was more of I won't insult his memory by calling him a Hollywood director at that point, but he was more polished, more accomplished, definitely had more of a focus on story and production values. And so with Texas Chainsaw 2, he did the smart thing and didn't try to capture that lightning in a bottle. He did not try to make a bigger budget version of that young poor man's movie. What he did instead was create what is more or less the Gremlins 2, the new batch of the Texas Chainsaw franchise. Chainsaw 2 is obviously a more polished affair, much bigger budget, not big budget by Hollywood standards, but big compared to what they had for the original one, and it is decidedly a much more movie. At no point does this give off any kind of vibes of a found footage film. This is a scripted, scored, choreographed cinematic experience. Tonally, it is a departure from the original in two major ways. One, it is a lot funnier, and two, it is a lot gorier. Now, most horror fans are already aware of that second fact, but it may come as a surprise to those who have not seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, given its reputation. It's not actually a particularly gory or bloody film. There is a definite, clear understanding that people are being chopped up and eaten, but very little of that actually occurs on screen. Texas Chainsaw 2 changes that almost immediately. In the first 10 minutes of the film, a guy gets his head sawed more or less in half, and you get to see that in clear detail, bloody, spurting prosthetics, pulsing brain matter, and yet because of the tonal shift, because of this shift to a lighter, louder, funnier film, the extreme graphic violence of Texas Chainsaw 2 is never anywhere near as disturbing as the off-screen violence of Texas Chainsaw 1. So there you go, kids. Use that argument, see if your mom will let you watch the movie now. I won't go too deep into the plot because, well, partially because there really isn't that much of one. It picks up more or less in real time, that is, 12 years after the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The Sawyer cannibal family is still out on the fringes of society, still doing their thing, and one night, one of their murders gets captured on audio tape by a call-in radio DJ named Stretch, played, I believe, by Carolyn Williams. A Texas Ranger, I forget his name, he's played by Dennis Hopper. He is a relative of Franklin and Sally from the first film. Franklin was the guy in the wheelchair, Sally was the final girl. He has been tracking the Sawyer family for several years in order to stop their murder spree and get revenge. He works with Stretch to use the audio tape to lure the family out of hiding, which works about as well as you'd expect it to. Stretch gets kidnapped and taken back to their crazy lair, which is inside an abandoned amusement park. And the rest of the movie is pretty much Stretch trying to escape, and Dennis Hopper's character, who has already been pushed to bug-eyed insanity, breaking into the lair with chainsaws to do chainsaw on chainsaw battle with Leatherface and the rest of the family. So yeah, it's not Casablanca, but it is a fun film, and frankly, just following the rules of 2, it's the last of the Texas Chainsaw Massacres that I actually consider canon. The rule of 2 being that for most long-running horror franchises, only the first 2 or 3 entries are considered canon. There are exceptions to this. We obviously skip Exorcist Part 2, but Part 3 and 4 for most franchises is where the film just turns into fan fiction. Anyway, getting back into the actual experience of watching the film, inside the virtual theater, it was good. There really is no substitute for watching a film with a live audience, even if it's a virtual live audience. And because Texas Chainsaw 2, for all its namesake, is not anywhere near as well known as the first entry, there were a lot of people in the room for whom this was their first time watching. Also, a lot of people who were clearly in their 20s and really hadn't been that exposed to any 80s horror films. and the response was overwhelmingly positive. I don't want to generalize or disparage the people who are going into what is right now a radically different filmmaking market who, if you try to make and sell any film right now, horror film, whatever, you're going to be up against a completely different landscape than the people who were making films in the 70s and 80s. This has a pretty clear effect of pushing people in specific directions, in pushing the films that are made. Like right now, there is this overwhelming grayness to all horror films. It's not a grittiness, not a grimy, unclean feeling, but actually a desaturated, gray lifelessness. Like most films that you encounter in the horror market now are experiencing clinical depression. I don't want to rail on this part too hard because it does start to dovetail with, the mysterious phenomena of every film somehow being better when you were a kid. But I do think that the unapologetic purity of this movie as a piece of funny, practical horror entertainment really caught them as a breath of fresh air. They don't make movies like this anymore, and to be completely honest, they didn't make a lot of movies back then like this either. Anyway, Texas Chainsaw 2, a good movie like the first one, but unlike the first one, actually also a good party movie. As long as you're not eating anything at the same time. Okay, we are running out of time right now, so we'll finish padding this thing out with a couple of unusual facts. Fact number 1, did you know that kangaroos keep growing until the day they die? That's right, there is no set maximum adult size for a kangaroo. They basically just keep on going until either something takes them down or internal biological processes become unsustainable. Now, in general, they tend to die off of natural causes when they're around 6.5 feet tall, because they are still aging. They're not immortal. They just continue to grow as long as nothing interrupts the process. And that shall remain science's public opinion on the matter until the Australian government finally ends its decades-long cover-up of the 60-foot Titan kangaroo. It lives in a cavern under Sydney. Okay, final fact for the day. If there are a group of wild horses, they will not all go to sleep at the same time. At least one of the horses will stay awake to keep watch. Now, knowing this fact, and also knowing that horses were domesticated regardless, we can logically assume that one of the horses sold the others out. Looking at you, Gary. Gary the horse. Okay, and that ends it for me today. This is, again, Norm Scott. I thank you very much for making it all the way to the end. And since you did make it all the way to the end, you clearly like the company. So why don't you just go ahead and hit subscribe and hit the notifications button as well. In fact, if you really want to get into the good graces, go ahead on over to our Patreon. Link is in the description. Join up there and directly support the creation of more stuff like this. We appreciate your patronage. Until next time, this is Norm wishing you all a good evening. Like the video gamers? We have more such wonders to show you, and all you have to do is subscribe and hit the notifications button.
I mean, you don't have to.
Also consider becoming a patron by following the link to our Patreon page, where we turn your cash into videos, comics, and games using the darkest of dark magics.
But mostly just cash.